Cornwallis, I'm going to need a good explanation why you surrendered to the degenerate colonials.
Sorry, sir. The French had me surrounded by the sea, and the colonials had me surrounded by the land.
I'm going to need a better explanation than that.
Sorry, sir, but you can find it right here.
The Battle of Yorktown is the most important battle of the Revolutionary War and could even be one of the most important battles of the American history. The Battle of Yorktown was the last major land battle of the entire war, and this is also the battle that won America's freedom. The Battle of Yorktown started when General George Washington found out that General Cornwallis had a camp near Yorktown, Virginia. At this time, he was in New York with General Rochambeau. They both began on their journey to Yorktown, Virginia. The British soldiers had no idea what was coming at them at this time. The French had sent the Navy to prevent General Cornwallis from being resupplied, which worked out in the long term. As a result of this, the French and English had a battle of the Chesapeake, where the French blockade had prevented the British ships from working their way to General Cornwallis. After the French had fought the British ships, they had returned to Chesapeake Bay to resume blockading any supplies from reaching Cornwallis. 11 days later, the French and American troops had begun the march to Yorktown. After the two forces had made it to Yorktown, the Americans had deployed their men on the right and the French on the left. The mixed forces had sent troops on the other side of the York River to oppose the British position. General Cornwallis had called in a relief force of 5,000 men and prayed that they would make it on time. With a 2-to-1 disadvantage, he had ordered his men to abandon the outer fortifications. During this night, the French and Americans began construction of a 2,000-yard-long trench, which was along the southeastern side of the British troops. On this day, the battle had begun. Washington had fired the first shot, which created a volley of fire. For the next 3 days, Americans had pounded the British forces with fire, and the British were losing resources fast. Knowing that his position was slowly becoming overrun, General Cornwallis had wrote a letter to General Henry Clinton for support. The British also had a number of troops dying because a smallpox outbreak had occurred during the fighting. General George Washington had decided to advance his troops 250 yards forward to take control of another parallel. The American and French forces were taking many prisoners while bombarding the British forces. Cornwallis had once again sent a letter to General Clinton, but telling him that the situation was very critical. He had sent 1,000 of his troops with the majority being wounded, to Gloucester Point, where he had then begun negotiating with General Washington about a surrender. At 9 a.m. on October 17th, a single drummer had mounted the British works to beat long rolls along with a lieutenant waving a white flag. This was the end of the American Revolution.
General Cornwallis, that explained it pretty darn good. I am still mad that you surrendered, but I have an understanding as to why you did.